Hi everyone. Now that it is officially 11:21 Central Time, don't know where everyone else is at, but we're going to get started here now. And so I'm glad that you can join this breakout session. I'll start out by introducing myself. My name is Kate Dressel, and I'm Executive Director of the Iowa Student Learning Institute. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a current high school senior. Well, I'm about to be a freshman at college, and I've been involved in the student voice space since fall of 2018, at least directly with this organization. I started out as Director of Communications, and I took on this role of Executive Director last summer. So I'll pass it off to Hannah now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Groos, and I am currently the event manager of the Iowa Student Learning Institute. I am going to be a junior at Norwalk this fall, and I joined the Iowa Student Learning Institute when I was a freshman after I attended one of the events, and I use she, her pronouns. The main goal is that we want to teach you how we as Iowa SLI have inspired students through our student-to-student youth voice initiatives, such as our Rise and Rally events, and then the youth-led programming that we have around our state. But then we also want to provide some easy tips that you can use for engaging students and fully representing student voice in all of your outreach initiatives.
And so I'll just give a little bit of background on our organization. So Iowa SLI was started by two high school students in 2013, and it's with the mission of revolutionizing Iowa's approach to education through the power of student voice. And this is something that we accomplish with a team of student-led volunteers such as Hannah and I from across the state of Iowa, and we hold several youth voice events throughout the year and sponsor some programming, which we're going to talk about right now.
So one of our main events is the RISE Student Leadership Conference. And so this is an event that's put on for students by students. And so it consists of breakout sessions, student speakers, and the tools that you need to act. And so it's focused mainly for students, but educators are also invited to participate in the breakout sessions. And so it's a really unique event because students start off the day by volunteering to lead their own breakout sessions. And so they volunteer to lead a discussion about an issue that is important to them. And after they do that, throughout the day, they'll attend these sessions, but then they'll also hear from other student keynote speakers who are really trying to motivate the students with their own personal stories about how they got involved in activism and student voice and how they're making a difference within their communities. And this event is really just encourages students to take the wheel in their own learning and lead by example on a day that's really meant for them.
And so that's held in the fall, usually in November, and we do our best to kind of provide transportation if students need to get to the event. And all of these are free events, and so we get our funding through various sponsors that are passionate about the issues that we're passionate about. And so our other event is the Student Voices Matter Rally, and as you can see, there's snow on the ground in that picture. So this occurs more towards the end of the Iowa legislative session because the rally is, unlike a typical rally, it's all about bringing students together for, we bring hundreds of different students from across the state to provide a unified voice from the students of Iowa. So they hear from political leaders, student advocates, and passionate adults. And then throughout the day, they transition to small groups based on their school or areas of passion. And then they can get trained by some professional lobbyists to craft their message. And the day ends in the Capitol Rotunda, and it's where they are given the opportunity to meet with legislators from both parties of the Senate and the House of Representatives. So this is really seeing student voice in action because students are able to identify, first of all, learn about what the legislative process is and how they can truly have an impact on their education through advocating for themselves and understanding who the representatives are based on their school district and their location in general. So we were supposed to have the rally this year in April, but it obviously got canceled due to the coronavirus. But in previous years, we have had hundreds of students be able to attend this event, which is really cool.
All right, so our next initiative is a little bit different from our main events that we put on each year. And these are actually student action teams that we implement at the local school level. And so they're called PowerVoice Teams. And basically, a group of students get together at the school level within their district, and they meet however often they want to decide which local issues they want to focus on. And so we work with these new groups to establish student representatives on their school boards so that they have more of a say in the different day-to-day decisions that are being made within their school district. But once these students form their club, they really work to pursue their goals by collaborating with teachers, administrators, legislators, and other stakeholders within the education community. And they get to decide which issues they're really most passionate about, whether that's school funding, standards-based grading, unfair school policies, or anything else that they really care about. But the focus of these groups are to enable students to enact policy changes within their school districts that they believe help their education. All right, and then as we transition to the next one where we're giving you tips on how to lead your own student-led events, we want to emphasize the benefits of doing these student-led events. So doing student-led events and getting students involved in the planning process takes extra time and it takes a lot more effort, but it pays off in the end. When you go to these events that are completely student-led and they really capitalize on student voice and youth participation, there's a certain energy that you feel within the audience, whether that's between attendees or just from the organizers who are so passionate about what they're doing. And so with my own experience, I didn't know a thing about student voice until I attended the RISE event in the fall of 2018, I think, or 2019. I'm not sure. But before then, I was really conditioned by the traditional classroom environment. I followed the rules. When I was building Legos, I followed the instructions. I never really did my own thing and went outside of the box to create whatever I felt was most effective for me. And so once I attended RISE, I saw these students who were stepping up to lead their own breakout sessions without a specific format laid out for them. And so they were really taking the initiative to speak up about the issues that they were passionate about without being told exactly how they did it. And so what I think is so special about student voice is that it removes the expectations and limitations that you typically feel in school and in ordinary events and conferences around your community. And that's what student voice is all about.
And so now we're going to transition to kind of the bulk of our session, which is the biggest takeaway that we've had as student organizers trying to put on these different initiatives with programming and holding several events each year. And so kind of the first point that I would like to emphasize is just the sheer importance of diverse student participation. Because when you have a diverse set of experiences from participants, whether it be race, gender identity, sexuality, their location, religion, it really adds value because it sparks more conversations between students and teachers about really core issues with equity within schools, as well as bringing a diverse set of experiences to allow for better conversations, deeper thinking, and stronger connections. And through exposing students to these new experiences, you have the opening of students' minds so that they can develop empathy. Like I said, encourages deeper thinking. And so some of the tips that we've learned is really being intentional about reaching out to equity-based groups, invite them to come and ask them to speak. We've had partnerships with, Des Moines Public Schools to bring in students that haven't previously been exposed to this type of special attention and programming. And there's also a strong community around ESL groups. And, also once you have diversity within your own organization, it encourages more acceptance for diverse participants. And so that's why it's also really important to explicitly talk about embracing diversity and new perspectives throughout your event and make that really an intentional piece of any programming that you have. Because if you're involving students, you got to put in 110% to make sure that you're not only reaching out to the students that you would typically think would be interested in this stuff, which might be, your straight A student council kid, and really focus on those perspectives that students usually don't hear from, the ones that wouldn't feel comfortable going for student council. And so just making sure that you're really intentional with that is a big takeaway that we've found in our organizing.
So another important part of having student-led events is including student interaction in every part of the event. And so really you want to show the attendees in the audience your commitment to student voice. And so students can tell if students have been involved, other students and other youth have been involved in the planning process, whether students were taking the lead on the planning, they were taking the initiative, whether they're creating the scripts for the event and creating a lot of the activities that are focused there, and whether students are actually being considered to be the keynote of speakers throughout the event. And so one way to do this is to, of course, include students in your planning process, but then also have a majority of student speakers within your event. And students can really tell whether or not you're committed to student voice. And another part about engaging students throughout the conference is that they can feel limited by restrictions on their creativity, conversations, and etc. And so they can feel less engaged if they feel like there are certain restrictions in place. So give them a lot of creativity and freedom throughout the event to step up and take on leadership positions, and to have a chance to really take the lead on what issues they're passionate about. And so we do that within our RISE event by allowing them to lead breakout sessions. So they get to step up and lead the conversations that they're interested in. But then also within our organization, the Iowa Student Learning Institute, we allow students to step up, whether they're student artists. They create our graphic design work and our the things that we publish, and to spread the word about our events. Sorry, I lost the word. And then we also had students completely create our websites. And then the foundation of this organization was built solely by students. In the events, the roles that are held within the organization are also held by students. And so giving as much space as possible for students to step up and take the lead on what is happening in your organization really shows to the attendees and the people who are receiving your programming. And so this does take time, because students aren't necessarily always willing to step up and go in those roles that you open up for them, because they may not feel like their voices are heard. So you have to really motivate them and push them to take these positions so that they can really get involved in the process.
And that kind of brings us to our next point about inspiring students at the event and through this programming. And so like Hannah has mentioned, with our RISE event and with the rally, we highlight youth through student speakers. This is a very powerful experience for students to witness. It's what really got me interested in the organization, and we'll have some examples of who our student speakers have been in the past. And just as a quick reminder, if everyone can mute themselves during the presentation, if that's possible, just so that when we submit the recording, there isn't any feedback. Thanks. And so through highlighting these student speakers, they're so much more approachable and genuine. Hannah and I have both had experiences because we've had other leadership roles and going to other leadership conferences that are put on for students, like through our school and clubs that we've been involved in. There's a really big difference between having an adult speaker to all students and then kind of the overall vibe and experience of the students at that event. I was able to approach the speakers at the RISE event and make genuine connections that inspired me to really take on a lot of advocacy work and make this, it became my passion, because I saw my peers being able to do all these amazing things. And it was incredibly inspiring, because there's a difference between seeing, a 30, 40, 50-year-old explain their experiences versus someone that's your own age and kind of feels on your own level, like you can approach them and really talk to them. And so that's why it's also really important to hold these student-led conversations and breakout sessions, so that the main voice that's being highlighted is students, and that they are able to take on the issues that are important to them, not what they think the adults in the room should be important to them. And so that kind of allows for students to not feel as censored, and they're more honest and open in conversations that are held.
So, since we're having all of these honest conversations between students and educators, we want to make sure that the environment that students are in makes them feel safe and really fosters collaboration between other students. And so, one way that we do this at all of our events is by setting expectations during the opening. And so, we explicitly state that this will not be your typical event. It's not like a typical conference. We want you guys to be involved. We want you to be live tweeting throughout the day. We want you to be participating in conversations. We want you to be asking questions and really fully participating and engaging in the conference if you are able to. And then we also try to promote a very inclusive environment. So we make sure that whenever we're doing introductions, we always allow students to introduce themselves with their pronouns, and then we also have them write their pronouns on name tags so that students feel comfortable with who they are at the conference. And they really feel like they're welcome. But then we also have a lot of icebreakers throughout the day that are just fun, and they're get to know you ones. It's not that you're trying to prove yourself to anybody. It's just truly getting to know the other students for who they are. And so letting them learn to be comfortable with each other is a really important part of all of our events. And then also to create that collaborative environment, we let students take the initiative and choose which issues are important to them. And so when they do that, they're a lot more willing to honestly talk about these issues because they have such strong feelings on them. At other events, it's really easy for adults to pick which issues they think are most important to students, but actually are not as, students aren't as passionate about as the adults think. And so letting the students choose which ones they want to talk about is a really important part. And then within the event, whenever we include adults, it's very intentional. So if we have an adult speaker, we always try to include a student side of that. So a student who's also speaking on that issue. And then we always have a guidelines that talk about how adults can get incorporated into the student voice space, and how they can respect other students at the event.
And so that kind of comes to one of our last points, which is just the importance of the idea coming from a student. And this has a lot to do with brainstorming about all aspects of the event. You know, this isn't just what's presented, you know, at face value for the day of, but when it comes to programming and, you know, inspiring students to look into and researching bylaws and how the structure of you know, a club at a school would work, or how they can advocate for themselves in the student voice space within their district level, on a state level, and on a national level. And so it's not only exposing them to these resources that would allow them to have the tools to create their own ideas, but really inspiring them to come up with these ideas on their own. And so that's where I think why the Rise successfully happened for 7 years in a row is just because students are a lot more motivated to be involved because they see that this idea is coming from a student. That's what made me really excited to get involved in the organization and in the student voice space, was because I saw all of these student initiatives. And even though there's obviously turnover when it comes to student leadership, just because they'll leave whatever school they're at, go off to college or wherever they're going, but it's really important to show them that their voice does matter, even if they are going to leave you the next grade. You know, not disregarding students because of those things is really important. And so an example of that is kind of the PowerVoice Teams that I think Hannah's going to talk a little bit more about now. Or no, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. What's important about those is that, you know, us as an organization, we kind of give these students free reign over identifying what issues are important to them in their school district, because there's a big difference between rural Iowa and, you know, downtown Des Moines, Iowa. And so through respecting that these students care about different issues, it shows them that their voice matters, and that it shouldn't matter, you know, where you're from, what your sexual orientation is, any of these things, whether English is your first language, that you still have the same amount of voice when it comes to your education and these things that you are a stakeholder in. And so that's a big takeaway that we've had. And so I'm just going to show you a few of our resources. So like, this is kind of our promotional materials in terms of like the Rise event. As you can see, it's an all-day event. We have students of all ages come. There's been elementary school students all the way, to some college, but mostly middle school and high school students. And then we have the rally, as you can see, also a full day event, but it's also something that, we have later in the year so that we make sure that we're stay in touch with students throughout the year, whether it's through our programming or these two different events. And so these are just some examples of the keynote speakers that we've had. And so as you can see, we have not only people from Iowa, but showing some out-of-state students that have experience with advocacy, because I think bringing in those different perspectives is really important. And then also, it's not only students involved in, very specific types of advocacy, it's also, people like Linda Brown, who was able to share some really powerful slam poetry at our 2018 RISE conference. And then we have more resources in the resource folder that I believe you should have access to that can show you kind of how the PowerVoice teams are set up. But as you can see on this slide, it kind of gives you a little bit of that idea. And so I just want to give, and here's our socials and such. I just want to give a big thank you to, our student facilitator here, who is making sure that I don't run over time, and our captioner. So if anybody has any questions right away, I want to open it up to kind of discussion. And so if you could just introduce yourself, your role in the student voice space, and where you're from, maybe what time zone, if you would like to ask any questions of us. So I'll open the floor. And if nobody has any questions, then I have some questions for you guys that I guess I can share.
I have one question, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Thanks.
I'm Bruce Perlow with Up for Learning in Vermont. And thank you guys for your presentation and insight into the work that you do. And it's impressive and it's inspiring. As our organization, when we work with youth, we also, in addition to amplifying youth voice, try to build youth-adult partnership. And I'm wondering if you guys could share some of the ways that you've partnered with adults that have enhanced your experiences, maybe strengthened the work that you've done, and maybe even provided you with opportunities to lead and be active through those partnerships with adults.
That's a great question. I'll go ahead and take that, and then if Hannah has anything to share after I go. I'd say one of the main partnerships, we do have a board of directors that's adults that have various roles. We have like a former librarian, we've had like some people with superintendent experience, but I'd say a main value that is added is when we get to go to the Iowa state capitol and have legislators and often their student interns come and speak and really connect with students on a level, not, you'll have some legislators that, often they have families of their own, they have students, and so they're also passionate about these issues. And so finding that common ground where these adults are really respecting student voices because they see that they're passionate about these issues. And they're like, oh, maybe I should speak to more constituents that are under the age of 18, and I'm not just reaching out to them because I want them to vote for me, type of thing. And so another way that we've incorporated adults within our organization, I'd say, is through the various roles that leadership and student volunteers within our organization have taken on. I think Hannah can speak a little bit to that because she's the student representative on the Iowa Board of Education, if I'm explaining her title correctly. But I hope that answers your question a little bit. I'll leave it to Hannah to speak a little bit on that.
Yeah, so within our organization, we have the board of directors, and so they really serve as kind of an advisory committee almost. And so whenever we have any questions or need advice, we feel like we can reach out to them and ask for their opinion. And so honestly, before I took on more leadership roles within the within the Iowa Student Learning Institute, I wasn't very familiar with the board because that's really just, they kind of act as an advisor to the executive director and the past president, or the past executive director, who's also on the board. And so they really just advise them. And then the executive director really provides support for the other members of the team within the organization. So there isn't a whole lot of youth-adult partnership in that aspect. But if we need help, like I'm the event manager and I hadn't necessarily planned a whole lot of events before this. I started working with one of the people on the board who was a 4-H outreach person. And so she planned a lot of 4-H events that focus on involving students in youth adult partnerships and things like that. And so I collaborated with her to create an event the event that I would be best for the students. And then also for like the newsletters, they reach out to maybe their English teachers or something like that to help them get whatever advice they need so that they can put their ideas into action. But then as far as like the Board of Education, I just took on that role. And so that's a kind of different partnership, but we're really focusing on making connections within our community to other adults who are supportive of our vision and the Iowa Student Learning Institute's vision, to make sure that our ideas are actually implemented within different school districts and around our state.
Another really, really quick note that I'd want to emphasize is that we have an email list of pretty much like every teacher that student volunteer within the organization has been like friends with or, thinks would be supportive of these things, because that's how we mainly get students to these events. Because, you're not going to reach every student in Iowa without being able to really know who their principal is and whether they can provide a bus to get them to these events. And so that's something that I really want to emphasize, is that we've been able to create, an amazing team, an amazing network of different teachers and, principals, et cetera, throughout the state that are able to spread our message to their students. And that's really important. So I think we maybe have time for one quick question if anybody else has a question.
Hi there, I just have a question. My name's Holly. I'm from Alberta, Canada. I currently just started a position with RCMP. I work with youth strategies. So I just had a question. I find that when I do large groups with youth, a lot of the youth are very engaged and willing to participate, and I find that sometimes discourages some of the other youth from speaking up and sharing their voice. So I was wondering if you had any insight or words of encouragement for me that I could use moving forward in my work.
That's a really good question. I think anybody who's had an event with youth would definitely echo your sentiment that it's a mixed bag for sure. And so it's really about finding ways to find those issues that those students that traditionally wouldn't speak up are passionate about. And so I think that's really just taking the time to give them some individualized attention. And, I can speak from experience that, in some environments I'm very outspoken and willing to talk about this, but if I'm in an environment with students that, either it's just like everybody's too quiet and I don't want to stand out, or everybody's too loud and I don't want to add to the chaos. And so, I think it's about finding the middle ground. And I guess my words of encouragement is that students really do care and they really do notice when you put in that effort, and youth really notice when, they're being listened to. And so that's had a major impact on my life. And I'm sure that you can have an amazing impact on so many lives. And so I encourage you to keep going with what you're doing, because I'm sure it's amazing work.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
And to also add to that, I think having smaller like student-to-student breakout sessions, where even if you have a large group and you only have like a couple adult facilitators, just giving them the space, other students the space to just get together in small groups and have discussions about issues, just giving them time to introduce themselves to each other and to get to know each other before they start talking about these conversations or whatever you are liking them to discuss, would also be really helpful. Because I know that if I'm not very comfortable around the people that I'm supposed to be having conversations with, or if I don't know them very well, I'm most likely not going to be speaking out a whole lot.
Well, since it is now officially 11:50, I'm going to kick you all out, I guess. And well, first, do we have the link to does everybody have the link back to the main session that they need? Is that in the chat, or do we need additional help with that? Because I know it's also probably going to be streamed on YouTube, but Okay, I'm going to assume that everybody has the link to the main breakout session, or that was emailed to them, or they have the information for that, so that we can all get back on there before it's too late. And so I'm going to end the meeting now, but I really appreciate everybody coming, and it was great to answer your questions. So bye.